I guess I should tell you what I was thinking of talking about. Naturally, if you're going to talk about Grihastha life, and you're going to talk about life in the material world, and you're going to talk about attachment and detachment, then at some point you have to talk about illicit sex, what that is and how to deal with it. And it's not something that's discussed at length or discussed openly. And I think that's a problem, and I think it can be a little confusing for some people, and then everyone has to deal with it in their own specific way, and they may not always understand how to properly deal with it. So that's what I was going to talk about, unless you have something that you really want to talk about. And so I'll give you a few seconds to think. And if we're going to talk about this topic, then I have a nice article I'm going to read by a godbrother who has a degree in psychology and who teaches Bhagavad Gita to non-devotees from that perspective of psychology, to go more deeply into the nature of the human being. So he's very good. All right, I guess Timothy's happy to talk about this. I have one small reluctance in talking about this topic. Prabhupada talks about illicit sex and sex in the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, actually practically everywhere, because it's the center of material enjoyment, but it doesn't talk about it in depth. And now we're going to talk about it for an hour, which means for some people it could backfire and be a little agitating because they're talking about sex. That's my reluctance, but we'll try to present it in a way that will help us. As I told the funny story many times, that after Satyananda Swami gave a very, very powerful class about being celibate and women and so forth, the devotee said that he was more sexually agitated because the whole time they were talking about women and sex. So I want to avoid that if possible. So now Timothy is saying, Prabhupada said just thinking about sex is illicit. So how do we define illicit sex? It's a good place to start. We have to understand that in Kali Yuga, that we don't suffer for sins which are committed in the mind. We only suffer for sins which are committed physically. But it's not to say that we don't suffer. What is said there is you don't suffer sinful action. It doesn't mean to say you don't suffer contamination. So a devotee could say, I don't have illicit sex physically. I only think about it in my mind. So is that illicit sex? So the answer is yes and no. The vow you make at initiation is no illicit sex, which means you make a vow not to do it. You're not breaking your vow per se by thinking about it, dreaming about it, and so forth. But it is possible that you will end up breaking your vow if you meditate on it too much, because as we know, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Dayato Vishayam Punsam. When you meditate on something, you become attached to it. And the fact that you are meditating on it is a sign that there is attachment there, and it's a sign that you need to do something. Now, when Prabhupada said even thinking about it as illicit sex, he was quoting, I believe, Yajnavalkya, who gave a very strict definition of illicit sex, which is meant for celibate men. And that definition is, one of the definitions is that illicit sex is thinking about it. Another definition is talking about it, planning to do it. These are all acts of illicit sex, where you're not actually doing it, but it's a mental, or you're doing it with yourself, not doing it with another woman, or you're looking at pornography or something, but you're not actually doing it. So then one could say, I didn't have illicit sex grossly, so there's no sinful reaction. But from our perspective as practicing devotees, we understand that doing those things will be the precursor for doing illicit sex. Like, if you're hungry and there's something to eat that you shouldn't eat, and you'll just say, I'll just take a little taste. I know the doctor doesn't want me to eat it, but I'll just take a little taste. And that's not a good idea, because you're probably going to want more. Right? Yes? I think so. Or they say, in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you want to give up alcohol, then you can't take even one drop, because that will aggravate it. So I think what we need to see the difference between the value take of no illicit sex and what the broader definition. If you want to be strict with yourself, then you could say, yes, if I think about it, it is in a sense illicit sex, although I haven't officially broken the regulative principle. But in attaining a higher state of Krishna consciousness, then when you're more advanced, then you don't think about it. You think about serving Krishna, you think of things in relation to Krishna. So the fact that we think about it indicates we're on a lower stage. And if we want to avoid it, then we have to avoid thinking, because thinking is the beginning. So that's the strict definition of no illicit sex. Think about it. Why would you talk about it? Because you're disturbed by it. Because you're thinking about it. Because ultimately you want to do it. That's why you would talk about it. That's why you would think about it, because there's attachment there. Or what to speak of planning to do it. But Prabhupada gave a lecture on this verse, and he described these different aspects of what is considered strictly no illicit sex. And then he said, but in this age of Kali, it's impossible. When you take a vow, no illicit sex, and you think about it, and if that meant breaking your vow, then everyone would have been broken their vow. Or most people would have broken their vow. And many people would be breaking their vow every day, or quite often. So Prabhupada said that in Kali Yuga, we can't say no illicit sex doesn't mean thinking about it, because not many people can do that, but we say it means not doing it. Now, then we have to define what we mean by illicit sex. And then I will go to this article. If you want to follow along, if you go to, there's a website called Grihasta Vision Team. This is what I did. I went to Grihasta, Grihastha, Vision Team, and then I searched sex, and the first article that came up is called Dealing with Illicit Sex. So I'm going to begin reading, and it'll take you a moment to get the article, but I'm just going to read a little bit and discuss it. I like the way he explains it, so I thought I'd read it. He understands human nature quite well. So here's the question. In ISKCON, we are taught to follow the 4 regulative principles, among which avoiding illicit sex is often the most crucial one. However, there are situations where one member of the couple doesn't agree on practicing sexual restraint, and this could lead to drastic breakup of the marriage. What can be done in such cases? Good answer. Good question. An important question. To clarify the question, what this devotee is saying is that we take a vow to avoid illicit sex, but sometimes there's a member of the family who doesn't agree on practicing sexual restraint, or another way of saying that is they can't. It's a polite way of saying they don't agree. For whatever, there may be different circumstances that at some point in their practice of Krishna consciousness they find it too difficult to restrain themselves, or they come to a point where they don't even want to restrain themselves. They don't think they can, or they want to, quote unquote, enjoy sex. And you happen to be married to that person who perhaps was restrained for some time, or was only restrained as a brahmachari or brahmacharini and can't restrain themselves well. And the devotee is saying, and if one of the spouse that doesn't want to have sex doesn't give in to this, or doesn't satisfy this need, the marriage could break up. And so what can be done? And then in answering this, he defines what illicit sex is, but also answers this question, which is an important question. So here's the answer. This is a burning issue which requires an honest and urgent clarification. It is not the first time I've talked about it, but so far I've done so only with my very intimate students. So what he's saying, and what's common in ISKCON, is that these topics aren't spoken about publicly. They're just generally spoken about with one or two individuals. And I've only spoken about this in writing, and the writing I sent was only to people who are asking me for initiation, so I could explain to them what illicit sex means. And I've never publicly published anything, nor publicly discussed it, and I think that's a mistake. I think it needs to be discussed publicly. So that's why I'm giving this class. So please don't run away. According to my understanding of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, I distinguish between two categories of illicit sex. This is Matsya-avatar. The author is Matsya-avatar. I didn't mention his name. So he says, I distinguish between two categories of illicit sex. Interesting, so pay attention. The first is premarital and outside of marriage. That's one category. Either you're married, either you're not married, or you're married, but you're doing it with a woman you're not married to. And he says they belong to the same category. That's one category of illicit sex. And the second is within wedlock, between a couple united before God, with the authorization and blessing of the spiritual master who sanctifies the marriage. In other words, in other words, the illicit sex is not sanctified before God. The marriage is sanctified. They're devotees who have been properly married, but they're engaged in sex within marriage, but not for procreation. So he's saying that he classifies both of these as illicit sex, but he distinguishes between them, so he goes on to explain. Both categories are classified as illicit sex, to use the classic terminology, but for me there is no comparison between the consequences of extra-conjugal illicit sex and those from illicit sex within a religiously constituted marriage. So he's making a huge distinction between having sex when you're not married and only with your, or sex when you're married with a person you're not married to, and sex within marriage. The term illicit sex is used to point out that sexual organs are not toys, and for both men and women their proper function is procreation. So here's the strict definition of illicit sex, that sex for procreation. And any sex which is not for procreation is illicit. That is the most strict definition. So in this article he's giving expanding upon that definition, because that is the ideal, and that is what Prabhupada wants us to follow, but not everyone can perfectly follow that all the time, unfortunately. So let's read on. The term illicit sex is used to point that the sexual organs are not toys for both men and women. Their proper function is procreation. Sexual organs are part of the body with a precise function, and every other function is every other function is improper or illicit. So that's an interesting definition. They have a function. If they're not used for the function for which they're created, then their use is illicit. So they were created for procreation. If they're used for any other purpose, what other purpose would they be used for? The purpose of enjoyment. It's like food. What is the purpose of food? The purpose of food, God created food to nourish the body. Food tastes good, yes. Is the purpose of eating to satisfy the tongue? Is that the main purpose? No. You don't eat to satisfy the tongue, you eat to nourish the body. Well, I also eat because I like it, okay. But the main reason you eat, if you're Krishna conscious, is to nourish your body. You don't just eat to eat. You say, well, I eat when I'm hungry. Yeah, but you're hungry because your body needs food. And you try to eat nutritious food. So, why did God create a banana with all kinds of vitamins and minerals and nutrients? Because we need those vitamins and minerals and nutrients. Why did He create the banana to taste good? I hope you like bananas. But if you don't, think of another fruit that you like. Because if they didn't taste good, nobody would eat it, and we'd all die of starvation, because eating would be painful. So He makes the process of eating enjoyable so we can get nutrients, and He creates food which is tasteful, and He creates spices which we can add to the food to make it tasteful so that we will eat. If nothing was, think of a food that you hate and think that was the only food on the planet. Well, you'd probably, maybe you'd prefer to starve to death, or just eat algae or something, or drink wheatgrass juice. But you wouldn't, it wouldn't be pleasurable to eat. So, someone says sex is pleasurable. Yes, if it weren't pleasurable, no one would do it. And the species would not continue, which is not a bad idea, but that's another topic. So, just because it's enjoyable doesn't mean that that's solely the reason God created it. It's for enjoyment, which is, of course, what most people think. But we have to understand, of course, from a philosophical point of view, from a Krishna conscious point of view, we say that that's the cause of bondage. So, in a sense, that's Maya's way of binding us, so that therefore there's pleasure there. But it is, and it's the pleasure of grihastha life. It's the pleasure which keeps us bound in the world, and material pleasure keeps us bound, so it has that function. But any sensual pleasure keeps us bound, that one keeps us bound more. But in another sense, unless there's sensual pleasure, you can't engage the senses. If everything you looked at disturbed you, you'd want to pluck your eyes out. If everything you heard agitated you, you'd want to become deaf. So because we need to see to function, we need to hear to function, we need to touch things, we need to eat, procreate, so Krishna makes them pleasurable. So just the argument that, we do it because it's pleasurable, it doesn't take into consideration the function. So once you take into consideration the function, the primary function is not pleasure, the primary function is procreation. That's what happens when you engage in sex. It produces children, that's the way it works. It's not an accident. So that is a very nice definition and a nice way to think of it, and a nice way to think of any of our senses. And as Prabhupada says, our senses belong to Krishna, so we should just use them for Krishna. So everything we look at, hear, taste, touch, smell, it should be prasadam, or in relation to Krishna's service. Okay, so now we'll continue. Having said this, which is that the proper function of the sexual organs is procreation. Having said this, the embodied being experiences many conditions, arriving to this body with a huge karmic load of samskaras and vasanas. Samskaras are impressions and vasanas are desires. So we arrive in this body with conditioning from past lives. So in other words, he's saying, therefore, some people have very strong sexual tendencies, physical or mental, stronger. Some people have them stronger than others. So they can't be avoided, they're there. And some people don't have them. It's not a big issue for some people, but for some it becomes more important. For some people, therefore, the urges could be so strong that despite all good intentions, there could be some lapses. Lapses meaning, you're controlling yourself, but at some point you become overcome, and then you engage in illicit sex. But one thing is the lapse occurring within the married couple, and quite another thing is the lapse outside marriage. Okay. So again, he's making this distinction between sex which is not for procreation within marriage and sex which is not for procreation outside of marriage. Of course, if you're married, then there is the possibility of sex for procreation. There's also the possibility of sex, at least within marriage, which is not for procreation, but which we will give for the sake of this discussion, and also because in some cases Prabhupada defines it this way, we'll also give it the name, the broader definition of no illicit sex. Now, Madhyavatar Prabhu is I don't think he uses that terminology. He uses the terminology that this is illicit, but it's a different kind of illicit sex than outside of marriage. And other devotees have used Prabhupada sometimes, as Prabhupada has sometimes given the definition that no illicit sex means no sex outside of marriage. So that, then one could say, well, what if one is having sex every day? Is that no illicit sex? Not really. It's not really what Prabhupada means. But my understanding of what he means is that even if you don't plan, if your sexual act is not planning to have children, but you don't take birth control, and even you don't chant 50 rounds because you weren't planning, but at least you will, if the wife gets pregnant, be responsible to not have an abortion, to take care of the child. So within marriage, if you're having sex, you will have children, you will raise them to be Krishna conscious. Therefore, in that sense, it's not a samskar where you chant 50 rounds, you pray to Krishna to send us a pure soul to this world who you can help. It's not that's the ideal, but it's not irresponsible sex, and where the woman is taking birth control and she's just you're having sex whenever you feel like it because it feels good and you're not controlling yourself. But you may lapse, but you lapse into it with your wife, and you're responsible enough that if you have children, you're not going to kill them in the womb, but you're going to take care of them. And you're going to love them, and you're going to raise them to be devotees. So that sense of it is, okay, it's not ideal, but it's not illicit in the sense of extramarital sex or premarital sex. That's the point. So sometimes Prabhupada says, illicit sex means no sex out of marriage. That's what he means. He doesn't mean you're using contraceptives, you're having sex every few days. That's illicit sex. If you're using contraceptives, it's illicit sex. If you're out of control, then even in marriage you can define different levels of what no illicit sex would mean. And so even within marriage, you could come to a point where now you're using contraceptives, now you're doing it often. We're not talking about lapses, we're not talking about occasional, we're not talking about a couple trying to be celibate but really struggling, and sometimes they just can't do it, and one of the partners or both of them needs to be satisfied periodically because the ultimate goal is to give it up. We're not talking about that, we're talking about just out of control. So I hope you understand the difference. And I have to periodically stop reading because then I have to go back to Krishna.com to see if you're still alive. And no one's going crazy or anything by what I'm saying here. Okay, so let's continue reading. So the last thing he said was, one thing is a lapse occurring within the married couple, and quite another thing is a lapse outside of marriage. Outside the regular couple, the failure is disastrous, both personally and socially, whereas within the regularly constituted couple, the damage is contained. But I'm still talking of damage, don't misunderstand. There's no comparison between the two damages. By the mercy of the divine grace, I've always strongly stressed So what he's saying is that if you take what I just said, the point is that Krishna consciousness means freedom from material attachment. And material attachment centers around sexual attachment. So freedom from material attachment, therefore, means freedom from sexual attachment. And so within the institution of marriage, it is one of the ways, one of the means by which one becomes free from sexual attachment. Brahmachari life is another means. Sannyas life is another means. All ashrams are ultimately means of becoming free from attachment. But within Grihastha life, there's more attachment. So the means of becoming free is a little bit indirect, but necessary for many people to go that indirect route. But the point is, the means is becoming free. And so the idea is ideally to avoid illicit sex, and if one can avoid it entirely, the idea is to minimize it as much as possible and gradually detach oneself from it to the point where one no longer engages not only in illicit sex, but comes to the point where one has children and one doesn't engage in any sex. So if we understand that's the goal, then we understand what Matsyavatara is saying is that the distinction, he's saying, I'm not saying that when you have sex in marriage and it's not for procreation, it's ideal, and it can be anyway equated with sex within marriage only for procreation, where you're chanting 50 rounds. But he's saying, but within a marriage in which the couple, their ultimate goal is detachment, and it's not that they're rationalizing the philosophy or making some kind of excuse for their behavior, but they're recognizing that it's not ideal and that I should become detached, and that this attraction is really the center of material attraction, and I'm not going to be liberated from the material world if I don't become detached, especially from this. And as Prabhupada said, you understand how you're becoming Krishna conscious by your detachment from sex, by your disinterest in it. Did they understand all these things? So it's not a rationale, it's not an excuse, it's not a new philosophy. They're attempting to come to this position, and so in that sense, the engagement in illicit sex is just something that the body is crying to do periodically, and one of the partners or both has found no other way to deal with it other than expressing it within the marital relationship occasionally, and so that's what they do. So that's what he's saying. So he's saying, outside the regular couple, means outside of marriage, the failure is disastrous, personally and socially, because socially it means, okay, now the woman's pregnant, or just engaging in illicit sex outside of marriage is wrong, what to speak if she gets pregnant. It's a bad example within our society. And it has nothing to do with anything that Prabhupada taught us. He taught us that men and women, when they're not married, they don't intimately associate. And if they do intimately associate, it's because they're going to be married. Or they don't even intimately associate that much unless they're going to be married. It's just, that's culture. Right? Of course, we're in modern culture, so we have to adjust. We don't want to be, weird with people and make them, and alienate them. But internally, we maintain a certain level of our own personal detachment, and if there is strong attachment to associate with a woman, particularly one woman, or for a woman to particularly associate with one man, it likely means there's some attraction. And if that's the case, then needs to be discussed between that man and woman to see if they're both on the same wavelength and they want to pursue that in a formal way, because any other way is for, the last 10 zillion years, any other way is considered illicit and improper. It's only in like the last 50 years that, or 100 years or a couple hundred years, that everything has just gone haywire. But Prabhupada says when he grew up, and so let's say he, as a young man, he grew up in the early 1900s, he said that in Indian culture, men and women never associated, never talked, and never had dealings with one another. And then the marriages were arranged. So that was, that was the culture. So there's no intermingling. And why was there no intermingling? Because if there's no intermingling, then there's no chance for illicit sex. And the only chance for sex was within marriage. So within marriage, then the children are taken care of by parents. If it's outside of marriage, then there's not always two parents. It's not committed. The whole thing, the whole scenario. So, illicit sex creates all kinds of problems. And that's why, and a man may say, well, marriage is an entanglement. And we talked about this a little before, because if I'm not married, then my life is simpler and I have more time for devotional service. Yeah. But getting a woman you're not married to is more of an entanglement, right? So you have to look at it that way also, So, it's like saying, I'm sick and it's better I fast, but maybe you try to fast and by 3 p.m, you're so hungry you just go eat a chocolate bar because you went crazy and now you get really sick. So that's the idea. Well, you can't fast. Well, just eat fruit then if you can't fast. So all right, you can't fast entirely. Okay, we'll get married and just have sex for procreation, like that. So you're attached to the opposite sex, and sometimes it's not that people get married because it's the sexual thing. It's the energy. It's the energy of the male energy or the female energy that they're attached to. So you can't live free from that energy. Your mind's disturbed. So eat something, but eat something healthy. Do it in a way that it's not going to increase the disease. It's actually going to cure the disease. Okay, you have this disease. Better you fast, but let's find things that you can eat that will help you. So it's something like that. That's the way it works. Okay. So if you don't do it that way, it can become a real mess. Okay, so he's saying there's no comparison between the two damages, illicit sex in marriage and outside. By the mercy of the divine grace, I've always strongly stressed the importance of following the regulative principles, and I am not talking like this to promote a different behavior, a different standard. I do not believe that those who seek spiritual realization and aspire to develop pure love of God should strictly follow the regular. What does he mean? I'm sorry. I do believe that those, early in the morning for me, I do believe that those who seek spiritual realization and aspire to develop pure love of God should strictly follow the regulative principles and therefore should not engage in illicit sex. At the same time, in my many years of experience counseling people, I have witnessed a lot of suffering caused by the uncritical, uncompromising application of the law. People live on different planes of consciousness. It is exceptional to find two people on the same level, even if they both sincerely desire to become devotees at the same time. In a couple, there is often a partner who makes quick advancement while the other might remain stationary for some time. This usually generates a gap. I have been advising couples for more than 20 years to help each other, to be patient and tolerant. If one of the two needs help, the other should offer it generously. Perhaps I have not stressed this enough. I consider that one should rigorously follow the regulative principles. But I am now talking of cases that could lead to serious turmoil in the family, cases that usually lead to betrayal. Okay, so now he's making an interesting and important point. And as I said, this is not really discussed so much publicly because it's okay, let's see what he's saying. Just elaborate on what he's saying and why it's difficult to discuss this. He's saying that, well, I'll elaborate on what he's saying. He said, you're fortunate if you marry a partner who shares the same values exactly as you. So let's say you feel a need to be in grihastha life, and it's not just because you need sex. There could be so many reasons, companionship, you want your own privacy, you feel you can be more peaceful, you can do better service with a woman, you're out preaching and you're always running into the opposite sex, and women are proposing to you, and you're not ready for sannyas. And it's not like, I just want sex, that's why I'm getting married. No, it could be, it's like I'm running into this situation. I realize I'm not really a brahmachari because when I'm at all these engagements preaching to women, they look attractive to me, or I'm preaching to all these men and I'm just thinking about, I really need a husband. So it could be so many reasons, right? So now, fortunate is the couple who share similar values, where the man says, I want to marry a woman who can help me in my preaching, and the woman says, I want a man who's a preacher because I want to preach and I want to work together. So wow, great. So they're working together, and the sexual thing is not really a big thing for them. And even in a couple like that, there may be lapses occasionally if they're young and whatever. They had a bad week or ate too much halva. But generally, that's not their mood, and that rarely happens, or it just happens when they're newlyweds or something. And so they're fortunate, because then within their marriage it never becomes an issue where one person is saying, I really can't control myself and I need to fulfill my sexual desire. So that's ideal. And how do we know our partner is like that? Ultimately, you have to use your intelligence and you have to understand maybe you're not like that, and maybe if you get a partner you don't want a partner who's so strict because you're not like that, and you have to discuss these things before you're married. And even if you find a partner who is like the way you are, they change. So the one who is not so strict may become strict, the one who's strict may not become strict. You don't know, you just can't know. So that he's dealing with the situation here where in the evolution of the marriage, one of the partners is not able to completely control their sexual desire, and they express that to their partner. And so what he's saying is, in his experience, if a person has, and of course generally if somebody comes to me like that, the first thing I'll do is I'll try to help them as far as I can control themselves sexually, because I believe that with proper support, which we don't have much within ISKCON, people can become more sexually controlled. Perfectly sexually controlled, maybe not for everyone. For some, I believe they can. Some will be more sexually controlled. There's a few rare cases who have such a black past that their sexual difficulties are on the level of addiction, and they need professional help. It's on the level of like an alcohol addiction. They're out of control because they had, in their past, they indulged so much in illicit sex, it became this addiction, and their brain is addicted to it, and that's an unfortunate reality. It's an exception. But we're all on different levels. So he's saying that in his experience, when people are in this situation, actually you try to help them, you try to help who's ever wanting the sex, one or the other or both, to be more sexually controlled, to understand the importance of that, and give them tools and attitudes and practices by which they can do that. But still, sometimes that's not enough, and so then the question is what should be done. And what he's saying that is, if the other partner doesn't fulfill this need, then the marriage may break up, it may cause betrayal, it may force one of the persons to find a partner outside the marriage, or in the case of a man, find a prostitute. If there's children, it becomes a disaster for the children, etc., etc. So, it's not ideal, but what he's saying is the option is even less ideal. And the reason this is difficult to discuss publicly is because Prabhupada has never discussed this publicly in his lectures and in his books. He's only talked about no illicit sex, refraining from sex. Sex is an attachment, we should give it up. He's never talked about satisfying one's partner. Now, to understand why Matsya would say this, and he's not the only one who says this, that many marriage counselors say this, there's a few reasons. One is because of the value of the sanctity of the marriage, the value of keeping the marriage together. So they feel that keeping the marriage together is more important than strictly adhering to the most, the highest definition of no illicit sex. So, and they also understand by doing that, gradually, eventually, as the body ages, then naturally the sex desire diminishes. And then the marriage is still intact, and gradually they'll be able to follow the no illicit sex principle. And it also follows another broader principle, and the principle is that husband, wife are meant to support one another. And so we have to see what will help them be Krishna conscious. Now you might say, but if I do that, it doesn't help me be Krishna conscious. It's not helping me be Krishna conscious. Well, yes and no. Because you're not doing it because you want to, you're doing it as a service. And so, obviously it requires a lot of detachment to do this as a service. It's, And if you do it too much, obviously it will be a disturbance. But if you could actually enter the mood of, I'm doing this to save a marriage, not because I want to, but because I want to help my spouse, and you enter that mood, and your spouse is willing to regulate it so it's not so often, and you see that it actually is helping the marriage, then you're entering a certain frame of consciousness within Grihastha life where you make personal sacrifices to satisfy the needs of your partner. And I understand for those who strictly want to follow this vow and who feel like they would be letting their spiritual master down, it's a big sacrifice. But I will say that many spiritual masters, and Matsya Avatar here obviously is giving this example, will tell their disciples that you should satisfy the sexual needs of your spouse if he's unable to control them, if it's at the point in which it's going to disturb the marriage by causing him to go out and find it with another person or a prostitute or like that, or just creating a real problem within the marriage. Now, I just want to go off and to make a side point, and I want to correct something I said in another lecture. I had said that in my study in the non-devotional literature on marriage, I had said that I had come across a lot of people saying that sex within marriage, and what they would describe as good sex within marriage, is critical to a good marriage, and if sexual relationships are, if the people's sexual life is not fulfilling, stimulating, I don't know how they explain it, I don't want to talk about it, but you get the idea, then it causes a problem. It's fundamental to a happy marriage. And there's some people that base a lot of their marriage psychology on this principle, and by saying that that's really what men want, and if men aren't getting that, ladies, sorry to say, they, wouldn't have the tolerance to hang around you. I mean, that being that blunt, statements like that, and that's really where men are at, and that's what they want, and you have to give it to them even if you don't want to, and if you don't, they'll go crazy and like that. So when I made that statement, it was based on having read these things or heard these things in lectures. And I don't deny that there's truth to that, at least within some men. But subsequent to me learning that and explaining that to you, I read a survey, research, so I think that which is more accurate, because it's not someone's speculation based on their personal experience or the experience of people they know, but this is actual research. And they asked people, how important is sex within your marriage? These are non-devotees. And it didn't rate that high, and which is quite interesting. And I was happy to hear that. I said, wow. It was not, the relationship, and why I didn't relate, and why I always figured it shouldn't relate high. I mean, in my personal experience, I never could see that as something that important, because even if you're not a devotee, it's not something you do that often. And as you get older couples, even non-devotees, as they get older in years, they do it less frequently. So how important could something be in your marriage, so-called enjoyment, that it's not even that much part of your marriage. It's not something that you do very much. What do you do? You talk, you eat together, you go places together. That's what you do every day. And so as couples age, the sex is something, it's just not something they do that much. So whether it's great or not that important. That makes more sense to me. I mean, maybe when they're younger they think it's more important, or if they marry just because of physical attraction, yeah. So then you might say, well, why would it be important in devotee marriages? It's not. I think in a devotee marriage, it's not important primarily as a relational necessity, but it's more of a physical necessity and need that has to be fulfilled. Now, I'll tell you something else which you probably never heard and may never hear again, and this might throw you off your chair, so maybe you should sit up straight and hold on. I asked this question of another devotee, and the question was, a woman, this is a real life situation, a woman wants to get brahminical initiation, and she tells her spiritual master that I follow the four regular principles, but my husband doesn't, and he wants me to engage in sex with him occasionally. And number one, should I do it? But secondly, can I do it and still get brahminical initiation? Because Prabhupada said, with first initiation we're a little bit lenient, but with second initiation we're very strict. So you have to be strictly following the four regular principles. So no hoochie coochie, no messing around, nothing. And if you want to get brahminical initiation, because then you're going to be dealing with Krishna on the altar. So strict. You're a good devotee. You chant 16 rounds every day. You don't mess around. If you don't finish them, you make them up the next day. You're not. You're just, you're following the principles strictly. It's not a problem for you. Then, okay, now you become a Brahmin. So this was a godbrother of mine who had this problem, and he said, what do you think? And I said, well, I'll ask someone I respect. And the person I respect said something. He's very liberal and open-minded and broad, and I think actually a better word is used, real. I think some of us are not real, so we can't discuss things this way. And when I say some of us are not real, I think what I mean is that some of us maybe don't want to admit what's really going on and face it, but this devotee, and happens to be a sannyasi, he's very real in this regard. So I asked him the question, and his answer is no. It's not she can get initiated as a Brahmin, and it's not a problem because she's just serving her husband, and this is what he needs, and it's not that she's voluntarily breaking the principle. And he said, the problem with the man often is that the man, their sexual desire is so strong that when they engage in sex, it's just they're using their wife like a sexual machine and impersonalizing her. So he was saying that's very bad. So okay, the wife fulfills the sexual need of the husband. But if the sexual need of the husband is just to use the wife like a machine, okay, I need a machine to satisfy this sexual desire, which is out of control. He said that's wrong. It's the wrong consciousness and it's bad. He said if it can be used, and this is the part that's going to blow you off your chair because you're not going to hear this anywhere, and no one's going to say this publicly, so maybe I'm stupid for saying it. He said, but it should be used to create a closer bonding between them. If you're going to do it, then use it to create a better relationship, if you must do it. And I expressed this to one senior god sister, because she was also interested in this discussion about what is illicit sex and like that. And when she heard that, she said, that is wonderful. So she was so happy to hear that. Because as men who have sexual desire, they have to learn, if they want to express it in a way which helps the relationship, which creates what you could call a better bonding or a closer relationship, or a better relationship with a wife. But if they just use it as a means to fulfill their individual sexual desire, it's really the grossest form of sex. And his point is, it's not. That's, if you're going to engage in quote-unquote illicit sex, don't engage it like that. Elevate it in some way, so-called elevate it. So, I won't talk about that anymore, because I don't know if you're all ready for that, but I thought it was an important point which you can, just put there in your memory bank somehow or other. Okay, so I see you have some questions. I hope you didn't fall off your chair. So, Timothy, one devotee here told me that getting married without the intention of having sex and having kids is illicit sex. Is that true? It depends on who you talk to, and it depends on, okay, in some places Prabhupada said, what's the point of getting married unless you're going to have children? That's the point of Grihastha life. But in dealing with the preaching mission of Lord Chaitanya and dealing with the mentality of Westerners, there is the mentality that some men and women, as I was saying before, they feel the need for that male or female energy in their life, that they aren't doing well living alone, and or, as I was saying, in their preaching, they're confronting the opposite sex because they're frontline preachers, and they realize that they don't have the detachment just to avoid, or they don't have the attachment to prevent the attraction. So, let's say you're a male yoga teacher, right? And you've got all these yoga students, and you're also teaching them Krishna consciousness, and 80% are women. So that you have to decide to either stop doing it because or the fact that you're just completely not attracted, or that you recognize that you are attracted, which may be the reason why you're doing it, why you would be willing to teach women yoga for so long. Now, what happened in one scenario, interesting scenario, there was a group of brahmacharis who were doing very dynamic preaching in New York, but the dynamic preaching meant that they started to do counseling. And some of the counseling was to women, and a lot of the classes there were women, and the women started seeing them as spiritual masters, Siksha gurus and like that. So, and these were all men who were been brahmacharis a long time and satisfied to be brahmacharis. And their spiritual master said, if you're going to continue within this preaching, then you have to get married. Because there's we don't want brahmacharis to run off with women, and this has happened. So I think that also answers your question, that you're in a situation like that, and you say, okay, you're in a situation and you're constantly confronting women. It can be dangerous. Recently, within the last 3 years, one senior brahmachari in our movement, who was in charge of a center with all brahmacharis, this happened to. And he was, in his work and his preaching, was associating regularly with women, and he ended up marrying one of them and going off with them. So it would probably have been better that he was properly married to a devotee, rather than, trying to maintain brahmacharya, than being in close proximity with women and not being honest about his attachment. Now, if we go to Lord Chaitanya's mission, so if we go back to the original definition, so yeah, generally grihastha life means children. And so, if you just want to hang out with a woman and not have kids, then he might be saying, then that's just like subtle sex, or you're going to have sex with your wife but you don't have kids. Yeah, that's illicit, all right. But if it's a recognition that I'm not yet renounced, I need that female energy, or I need that male energy, or that would be better for my spiritual life. There's a class that's given by the Grihastha Vision Team, and it's called Strengthening the Bonds That Free Us, which is a nice title, because what they're saying is that you go through the process, and in a sense you become more attached, but that's how you become detached. It's like, should I eat the laddu? No, you shouldn't, it's not good for you. Yeah, but I really like laddus. And so all day you're thinking about laddus. It's like, stop thinking about laddus, just eat it, and you'll stop thinking about laddus. And then you eat the laddu and you go, oh, I have a stomach ache. Now you have to deal with that. So grihastha life's a little bit like that. Okay, it'll prevent you from this meditation. Should I get married? Shouldn't I? Should I get married? Shouldn't I? Anytime you're going through this should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, should I, and it doesn't stop soon, that means you should, because it's obviously something that's there in your mind. If it's should I, shouldn't I, and it just goes away, then it's probably not something you need to deal with. So, all right, now you've got the stomach ache, so you got to take some medicine and deal with it. All right. So grihastha life is you deal with it, but by dealing with it, the point is that you become detached. And another point is, well, can I serve Krishna? Can I actually serve better in this ashram? And for many men and many women, the answer is yes, I can serve better. I have observed personally women who have good husbands do better in Krishna consciousness in general than women who don't have good husbands, or who have husbands who leave Krishna consciousness. It's not absolutely true, but in general, women who have good husbands stay in Krishna consciousness their entire life. And women who don't have good husbands often tend to have trouble or leave Krishna consciousness. In other words, if a woman has a good husband, her chances of being Krishna conscious are a lot higher than if she has no husband, unless she's completely renounced. And that's rare. Very, very renounced, very advanced, which she can be and she can do. But if she isn't, then her chances of being Krishna conscious are higher if she has a good husband. So then you take a woman and say, well, I don't really want to have kids, but it's woman's nature to want to be protected, to be guided, and so forth. So it's natural for a woman to be married. And then a man says, well, I don't want to have kids, but I just need the female energy, or I'm preaching and I'm not renounced, and I want the help of a woman, and she, we can run a center, and she can deal with the women, I can deal with the men, she can be my sister. All that. That's how Prabhupada also looked at grihastha life. So it wasn't like if a household or couple didn't have kids, Prabhupada called them up and said, hey, what's going on here, Where are the kids? He didn't do that. Prabhupada would call you up and say, what's going on with the preaching? How are things expanding? So we have to see it that way. If that's the purpose of the marriage, then we can't say, okay, this is illicit sex, or it's wrong, or you have to have kids. There's a couple in Salt Lake City, Charu and Baibabi, and they've been married forever, and they don't have any kids. And they're probably doing some of the most incredible preaching in the entire movement. It's just like this powerful team. Individually, they probably wouldn't be as powerful. There's a synergy between them, and they never wanted children. And so, for some devotees, their children, their family is going to be the people they make devotees. And it really becomes their children when they're older, and the people they're preaching to are young enough to be their kids. So some devotees have that mentality that the need for children is not so strong, and they really have a strong desire to help people become Krishna conscious. Now, having said that, we have to say something else. That if either one of the spouses strongly desires kids, it's not generally advisable to deny them, because it can create a lot of friction and or it can create a need or desire to find another partner with which they could have children. Now, it may come from the woman, it may come from the man. Generally, women are psychologically oriented to have children, and so if they don't, it can have ill effects upon them. If they don't want to, and the man doesn't really mind, then it's probably better not to force them, unless they're saying they don't want to, but the man sees that by their nature or by some idiosyncrasies or psychology, they're in denial and they really do, and for some reason they say they don't, then he may discuss that with them and say, I think you need children because I see you doing this and that, and I think it's just a reflection of your desire to have children. So these are all things to consider, but I definitely wouldn't force anyone to have children against their will, or definitely say that you have to, if you're married, you have to have, even when you don't want to, because there are examples of good marriages where men and women didn't have children. So that's a broad answer, which I hope covers most bases. It's 7:34, but let's just finish reading this. We don't have that much more to go. If the willingness to overcome one's limitations is there, some careful concessions can be excused, thus avoiding big, serious, irreparable havoc. In other words, he's saying what I said, that if you have the willingness, if the goal is to move forward, to ultimately detach from illicit sex, then you can avoid some, the damage it's repairable. In my answer, I limit myself to say that we shouldn't put extramarital illicit sex on the same level as the occasional weakness in married life. Considering them the same would show a lack of spiritual comprehension and maturity and misunderstanding of the function of controlling sexual energies. To rectify a person, to rectify the character, to cure a disease, we need to follow the path of recovery. An expert doctor always knows how to administer the medicine. I am not surprised or astonished if a young couple of my students once in a while indulge in effusions that go beyond the limit. Of course, I absolutely don't encourage such things because they dissipate emotional resources and increase bodily identification, distracting the devotee from the real purpose of life, Krishna Bhakti. At the same time, I am in my late 50s and I have some knowledge and experience of psychology. I have seen people who have rigidly negated their impulses for a long time and later, even in the guise of renouncers, have abandoned their religious vows. So what he's referring to is that, if you repress too much, then the desire may come out later and create havoc for you. So, sometimes when one is young, they need to fulfill these urges so they don't go crazy by suppressing them to the point that when they're later in life, they don't when they think they've actually overcome them, they realize they haven't, and then even a sannyasi can fall down. Repression and sublimation, what he's talking about, suppression and sublimation, they're different. Whoever represses his sexual instincts without being able to sublimate them, which means increasing his sadhana and connection to Guru and Krishna, won't be able to resist long enough and will inevitably head to a fall down. So he's saying repression means you're just pushing them, but they're still there. Sublimating means you're purifying them. You're in some way, by your advancement in devotional service, you're overcoming them, you're dealing with them, they're becoming purified, that they're lessening. These fall downs could be so serious that the individual thrown in such a state of moral and spiritual prostration might not be able to rise again, at least in that lifetime. That's a very important point. That if one suppresses and doesn't purify but remains so-called renounced, it may come to a point where it may damage one's spiritual life to the degree that they can't continue practicing Krishna consciousness in this life. As the Vaishnava scriptures explain, only a few people in this age are already so elevated that they can immediately and completely abstain from sexual activity. The majority of people need gradual distancing, protected by the institution of marriage and regulated by the four principles, the necessary groundwork for ethical life and the pursuit of spiritual realization. The management of emotions requires great competence and maturity, both cultural and spiritual. The guidance and direct assistance of the spiritual master is therefore essential, especially in crucial moments of life when one is called to make fundamental choices, like the choice of ashram, that if wrongly handled could jeopardize or stop spiritual advancement. Both repression of instincts and indiscriminate indulgence can produce neurosis and serious personality disorders. Very interesting. Both repression of instincts and indiscriminate indulgence. So he's citing here an imbalance. He's a psychologist, so now he's going into psychology. I know something of psychology. So he's talking about repression as an extreme, and then indiscriminate indulgence as an extreme, and then normality is in the middle, where you're recognizing your desire and you're fulfilling it in a way which doesn't degrade you. Whereas if you repress, he's saying that ultimately if you don't sublimate it, it's going to come out and degrade you. Or if you indiscriminately indulge, it's going to degrade you. So proper psychology or normalcy, as opposed to what he's describing here as neurosis, is balance. It's finding that place in the middle where the desire, you recognize the desire, but you engage it in a way that you become purified. Our Vaishnava literature explains that psychophysical energies indispensable for the journey towards transcendence should be neither negated or repressed, but nor indiscriminately dispersed. They should be correctly used beneficially to the development of personality. In other words, they should be sublimated by engaging in devotional service. So, and then he goes on, Harinam Japa and Nam Sankirtan, deity worship, spiritual association are the best means to overcome the problems of lust. Experience teaches us that through the discipline of Bhakti Yoga, not only is it possible to sublimate impulses by the elimination of the self-destructive unconscious charge, but also reintegrate them on the plane of pure consciousness as divine rasa. So, the point is, if you study Prabhupada's teachings on sex, actually it's late, so maybe we'll continue next time and I'll take your questions. There's too much to read. If you study Prabhupada's teachings about detachment, particularly in relation to sex, it's very, very clear that it's only by becoming attached to Krishna will this attraction for sex, will we ever be able to overcome this attraction. I mean, and then until that attraction for Krishna becomes very strong, then we have to deal with it. So we deal with it, one, by very strong self-discipline, and to the degree, number one, that one is disciplined, and to the degree that one has an intense desire for association with women, or doesn't have it, then one will deal appropriately. And so until one is on a higher level of Krishna consciousness where the attachment for sex will be reduced, then one has to deal with it through strong sense control, good japa, good sadhana, good association, but for some people, or in addition, entering grihastha life and then purifying the sexual desire through that ashram. So that's a means for purifying. It's not a means for indulging, and it's a means for purifying it. So therefore, if you have it and you need to go through the ashram to purify it, that's normal. And if you neglect going through that ashram and you repress it, and then it comes out, and one day, you end up with some girlfriend having sex every day, then you realize that, or vice versa, you end up with a boyfriend having sex. You realize that you were out of balance, and you weren't confronting the reality, and you weren't properly dealing with it. So the whole point of what he's saying really is to understand where you are sexually and to deal with it properly, but always deal with it in a way that your goal is to become Krishna conscious. So, as I said, I think we'll wait till next week to go further, and I'm going to go back to chat and see what you have to say. Okay, Timothy. He said sex means sense gratification. I don't believe him. There's a common idea within ISKCON. Well, sex means sense gratification. Eating means sense gratification. But we eat prasadam, so we purify it. So we have sex for procreation, so we purify it. Doesn't mean when you have sex for procreation you don't enjoy it. It doesn't mean when you eat prasadam it's not enjoyable. But it's done within a religious context. So in that sense, it's not sense gratification, or it's sense gratification which is authorized, or it's sense gratification which is not degrading. So, in a strict sense, in the most strict sense, you could say that, sex is sense gratification, whether it's illicit or licit, because it's gratifying a sense. But because it's done for Krishna, then you don't really call it sense gratification. You call it gratifying Krishna's senses. But we can't deny that your senses are being gratified, but at least you're doing it, you're not going to do it outside of dharmic principles. So if you're doing something which is dharmic, then from the textbook point of view, it's not sense gratification, because you wouldn't do it otherwise. And sense gratification from the textbook point of view is whimsical action. You do it because you like it, because you want to. And if you're doing something according to Dharma, according to Shastra, that's not sense gratification. That's how you distinguish between what is sense gratification and what isn't. Your Shastra Vidi Mutstrija, Krishna says, if you give up the Shastra Vidi, if you give up the Shastra Vidi, the injunction of the Shastra, then you act whimsically. That's sense gratification. And whimsically means do what you want when you want. And following Shastra means you don't do what you want when you want, you do what Shastra says when you should do it. So if you engage in sex after chanting 50 rounds for procreation, that's not really sense gratification, because you're only doing it to have a child and you're doing it according to Shastra. So from the textbook point of view, the answer is no, it's not sense gratification. Now, did you enjoy your senses when you did it? Yeah. Did you enjoy the prasadam when you did it? Yeah. Is eating prasadam sense gratification? No, it's honoring prasadam. Did you enjoy your senses? Yeah, I did. Is that sense gratification? Is it degrading? No. So that's how we understand it. So Krishna Kirti says, listen carefully to Mahatma. He is fully representing Srila Prabhupada's mood and instructions as per the sacred scriptures. Depend what you want really. Depends on what you want. If you want to attain self-realization of God, this is recommended path to follow. Your humble servant. Thank you. Krishna Kirti says, thanks for your attentive and respectful listening, Timothy. That's a secret for good understanding of these delicate issues. I don't believe that marrying without kids means sex. No, it doesn't. That may be there somewhere in Shastra that it does. But yeah, like Krishna Kirti says, if you understand the difference between illicit and illicit, the definitions, then it's not. And even if you married and you didn't want to have kids and you had sex, but it wasn't intentional, it just happened, then it's not, strictly speaking, it's not considered illicit. So the point is that the sexual energy, the sexual attachment, that's the main attachment in the material world. That's the, if you want to just like boil it down to an essence, that's why we're here. It's that sexual attachment. It's like, you can give up your need for money. You can give up, so many attachments, but the attachment for the opposite sex, that's the most difficult thing, and it's connected with pride. And we know that pride is, these are the real binding forces. The sexual attachment and pride, they go together. So if we're going to become Krishna conscious, if we're going to understand Krishna's Leela with Radha and the gopis, we can't understand it well if we want to imitate them, if we want to be like them. And that's why we need to become purified of this desire. Because we have such a strong desire to enjoy the opposite sex. But the wonderful thing, or the nice thing about Grihastha life, is if you enter it in the mood of serving the opposite sex, then instead of seeing the opposite sex as an object of your enjoyment, you constantly have the opportunity to serve them. And so by serving the opposite sex, it purifies you of that propensity, because the propensity we have is to enjoy them, which is why a man would really like to enjoy with a lot of women, and a woman would like to nag her husband to death to get him to do anything and fulfill any whim she has, because she wants to control the man, and she wants him to just ride her off on a white horse into paradise and give her whatever she wants. And he just wants, he has such a strong desire to enjoy her and make her his servant and his sexual object, and if he could, he'd marry 100 of them and do it to all of them. So the opportunity to serve that person purifies us of that desire, and that's what's so good about Grihastha life. So many sannyasis will tell you all the things bad about it, and so many of our shastras would tell you all the things bad about it, but we have to understand what's good about it, because it's an ashram that most people go through and how it works. And what's good about it is you get to serve the person that you've been conditioned to thinking about as an object of your enjoyment for a zillion lifetimes. And someone told me there's no such thing as a zillion. A zillion is not really a word. It's not an official number. It's probably a word, but not an official number. But a zillion means a lot. So for a zillion lifetimes, we're thinking, how can I, you go up to some man, right, who's got no integrity and say, would you like 72 virgin girls in heaven? Yeah, sign me up. Well, here, just take this bomb and, blow yourself up and you get 72 virgin girls. They're all yours. Hey, okay, let's do it. Why would anybody do that and be anyone stupid enough to think that that's what a religion is? Because that propensity is so strong that, any man in the street say, hey, you want 72 virgin girls? Well, if they're beautiful, why not? You got give me the money to take care of them. Sure, why not? Yeah, that's actually why I came to this world. That's I'm trying to be Krishna. He's got 16,000. Yeah, I'll sell for 72. I'll work my way up to 16,000 if I can. Why does Krishna have 16,000? Because he's saying, look you can't do that. I can do that. And so don't try it. It doesn't work. You can't do this. But what you can do is enjoy me doing it and serve this Leela. And if you have a woman, then serve her. Don't try to enjoy her like and like you think I'm enjoying these women. I'm not enjoying, I'm also serving. I'm also controlled by them. So we look at Krishna and go, hey, why can't I be like him? Everyone says, hey, Krishna had 16,000 wives, why can't I? He's not enjoying them like you're trying to enjoy your wife, or like you've been trying to enjoy those 16,000. There's no illicit sex there. It's pure love. We don't understand what it is, because we can't understand love because we're overcome by lust. So we think what Krishna's doing is what we would do and what we want to do. So the whole point is, until we become free from that lust and that sexual attachment, we'll never be able to understand the Leelas of Krishna and enter into love of Krishna. So to have the opportunity to serve, whether you're married or not, to serve the opposite sex. It's a wonderful opportunity because it is the antithesis of the propensity to try to enjoy them, control them, nag them, exploit them, whatever it is you want to do with the opposite sex. And you just get the opportunity to serve. So whenever you have the opportunity to serve the opposite sex in a setting which will not agitate you sexually, take advantage. It's purifying. The men, you can serve prasadam to the women. You won't go to hell, don't worry. You won't have illicit sexual dreams if you serve prasadam to women. So, you understand the whole... So when we understand that the whole point ultimately is to become free from it, and then we understand how the institution of marriage is as a facility to become free from it, and when we enter that institution, we enter it with that mood, and with the mood that I'm a servant, I'm not an enjoyer, then everything is good. People in the marriage counseling world teach a principle which is very important, and if Guru Nishta will put it on Facebook soon, because I sent it to her yesterday. And it's this phenomenon which we discussed a little bit about falling in love. And the phenomenon of falling in love is it's a chemical process. And you become intoxicated. The person you're with causes chemicals, what's the word? Chemicals to excrete. Is that the word, Marina? Excrete chemicals, hormones. It causes the excretion of hormones in your body. And it's intoxicating. And so being around that person makes you feel good, just like taking a drug makes you feel good. So what the professionals in the marriage counseling world, or marriage, whatever you call it, teaching world, say is that it's very easy to fall in love because you don't have to do anything, and you think you're in love, and you have this really wonderful relationship, and everything's great between you, but actually you've done nothing. They've excited your chemicals. But at a certain point, the chemicals wear off. And all of a sudden, they don't make you feel good like they used to. And then what happens at that point is you actually have to work on the relationship to make it work. Because before it was just a drugged up relationship. It was working because you were drugged up with love. It's like, two people get together and drunk, they have a great time. But if they're not drunk, they may, not get along well and not be friends. So it's a little bit like that. So then the drug wears off, and then there you are. You're left with this person. And then now you actually have to work on the relationship. And so what the people in the marriage counseling world say, at that point, don't think about, how this person made you happy and how they're supposed to continually make you happy, but the real thing is, how can you make that person happy? And I thought, well, that's perfect. That's Krishna consciousness. How I can serve that person and make that other person happy. It's not about this person making me happy. I do so many problems in marriage when it's all based on you don't make me happy. If you did this, I'd be happy. You're not making me happy. Why not think how to make the other person happy? So it's such a good opportunity because our conditioning is we want the opposite sex to make us happy. And how do we want? And the man, wants to exploit the woman as his servant, as his, hey, just do what I tell you. You're stupid, you're not good for anything. Just do, just cook and take care of the kids. And give me sex when I want it. That's what you're good for. What could be further from Krishna consciousness than that mentality? And you'd be surprised how many men, so-called Krishna conscious men, have that, because it's a carryover from a zillion lifetimes of conditioning, right? So if you enter the ashram and you say, woman, respectable, women are respectable, meant to be protected, I am their servant, that is my duty. How to make them happy? It purifies us of that tendency to exploit. And that's how we purify that sexual tendency. That's the value of it. So you have to enter the ashram that way. And then you will gradually detach yourself from it. So, I just lost you all on Krishna Kant somehow or other. It just, no, here it is. Okay, I'm going to go back and see. I have to get back on and see if there's anything else to say, and if you have any questions. If not, I will end class here. So, We have a course on sexuality. I have a course on sexuality for men. I don't think I could do it for both. I mean, what we can do here in these classes kind of covers both, but I think you need to deal with it specifically for men and women, and I don't think I'm the release hormone just. I don't think I'm the right person to do it for women. I think it has to be done with a woman. But the next class, we'll discuss this more. But if you understand, I think the real thing to understand is that Krishna Lila couldn't be more opposite than sex, and it couldn't be more opposite than illicit sex, although it looks like illicit sex, but it's the exact opposite. And until we start developing the service mood of my senses are for satisfying Krishna, we won't get a glimpse of what that Leela is, Radha and Krishna, or even between Krishna's mother and Krishna's friends. We won't get a glimpse of what that love is. And as you get a glimpse of that love, then you understand it has nothing to do with lust, and it purifies the lust. And so as we rise in devotional service, then we come to this Anishta stage, which where the lust starts to diminish quite considerably. And then when you come to Ruchi, when you get a taste, well, how do you get the taste? Because now you're starting to understand more deeply what is Krishna consciousness, and you're tasting that, and you're not trying to taste material lust. So Grihastha ashram is meant to help us get to this higher stage, and when you get to the higher stage, then there's no problem with illicit sex. Illicit sex is the problem is on the lower stage. Sexual desire is mode of passion. And so when you're Nishta, Ruchi, you're not really dealing much with passion. When you're dealing with passion and ignorance, that's where the sexual desire comes from. And so that's why the sadhana, the good chanting, the association, because these things bring you to sattva gun. And when you're in sattva gun, then these strong sexual desires are diminished. And that's why, this is how we answer the question, it's like someone may say, well, sometimes I just don't feel it, and sometimes I do. And because I don't feel it, therefore, I don't think I need to be married because it's not there. But then sometimes I get confused because sometimes I feel it. Well, you're feeling it when you're in passion and ignorance, and you're not feeling it when your sadhana is good, Krishna consciousness is good, you'll feel it less. But being married is not just a question of how much gross sexual desire you feel, because you're going to feel, when you fall into passion and ignorance, then you're going to feel it. If you're more a sattvic person, when you fall, you'll fall into higher stage of passion or lower stage of sattva gun, and then you won't feel it so much, and so you won't need it. And so probably grihastha life is not something you really need. But if you're going, well, I was going for months and really good, but then I fell into this horrible gross sexual desire, that's probably because you were transcending it well, but those desires have not yet been purified, and they're very strong. And so you're going to have to purify them, which is an indication, that they're strongly there and you have to deal with them. So that's how we understand this unsteadiness. It just depends on how much ignorance and passion is affecting you. That's the idea. And if it's affecting you less, then you can remain more pure and without female association. And if your samskaras and the modes of nature are such that you need it, then you just have to recognize if it keeps coming back and back and back, it's because it's there, and I'm not dealing with it properly. And then you just have to accept all the hardships of grihastha life as what it means to deal with it, but understanding those hardships and the difficulties, they all come in the form of serving the wife, serving the husband, serving the children, working to support all that. And it's all saying to you, look at what I have to do just to satisfy the sexual need. And that purifies you. Now, if we're really smart, we'll say, look at what one has to do to satisfy the sexual need. I'm not going to get married. And then one will just be detached. That's enough. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to do this. This is too much work. I don't need it. And then one can remain brahmachari and it's not a problem. But for some men, they can't realize that until they do it. And then when they do it, they go, this is a lot of work just to satisfy sex. I'm only supposed to have it, a couple times in my life. And yeah, well, you didn't understand that before. Now you understand it, so now you're getting purified. So now don't complain that you have to do it. You had to do this to understand it. And by continuing to do it, you're becoming purified. And then when you're 50 or 60, you're good to go. You've been it, you've done it, and you're like, okay, I paid my wages. Okay, I'm out of here. Give me Vanaprast. Get me out in the world. I want to preach. Now, that sounds funny, but it's true. Now, what we're trying to do, at least in Mexico and in general in Krishna consciousness, is somehow to be able to go through the Grihastha ashram and get those realizations and also spread Krishna consciousness as well. If we can do both, hey, best of both worlds. We're like on top of the world now, because you have good Grihastha ashram, which is a safe place to be, even though you have to work hard and deal with a lot of, kids get sick, and sometimes your wife or husband doesn't like you one day, and whatever. And it's all hard stuff. But still, if ultimately we can be using that ashram to preach and make people Krishna conscious, wow, perfect, wonderful. Then we're in a safe position. If we're not good brahmacharis or good brahmacharinis, then we're in a safe position. There's nowhere to fall because we're already on the ground. Ha ha ha. And that's a joke. It's not exactly true, but you understand. It's not. When you're a sannyasi, you're up high, so you can fall. When you're grihastha, it's real life, and so your wife is your husband is protection. So if you can do that, then that's great. It's steady. And still, the ultimate goal is, and you use that ashram to become purified, so you can get detached from the material, so you can go into Krishna Lila. First, understand the Lila, which has nothing to do with that lust. That's the idea. Hare Krishna. I think it's clear now, isn't it? And if it's not clear, Reha, hopefully we'll put this up this week, and the other ones are on. She's creating on my Mahatma Das channel, and she's creating a section for marriage, something like how to make a bad marriage good, a good marriage better, and a marriage to be work. I think that's the name of it. So, I think it's all clear. As I always say, it's clear to me. And as Timothy always says, it's super clear. Good. So every teacher wants to hear a student say, it's super clear, because then he knows, okay, he communicated. Okay. So as long as it's super clear to Timothy, if it's not super clear to you, ask Timothy and he'll explain it. Now, Timothy, I have one last thing to say, even though it's 8 o'clock, but and I may be keeping some of you from work or something. I have one last thing to say. And I have, not just to Timothy, but I have this to say to everyone, and it's not in any way a criticism of any devotees, because I don't believe that as Vaishnavas it's proper to criticize. It's not our culture to criticize. But what we sometimes have to do is point out ways in which devotees sometimes may misunderstand a principle. And let us just understand there is the black-white understanding, and there's the shades of gray understanding. And so in black and white means it's either this way or that way. It's either is illicit sex or it isn't. And the shades of gray of understanding is, well, illicit sex could mean this, could mean that. You could be married with children, without children. You could be married and be engaged in sex, but it's not really in the broad sense illicit sex, but in the strict sense, So those are the shades of gray. Now, many devotees, I don't know if it's many devotees, but what you will find, and I'm sure this must be true in every religious organization, is that some devotees will make statements without fully understanding the depth of what they're saying, because they haven't fully understood the depth of the topic. And so they'll just say, well, in Krishna consciousness we believe in this, or in Krishna consciousness we don't do this. But if you go in depth in understanding what it is we do or don't do, then you start to find that, well, there are exceptions, and Prabhupada did say that sometimes we do this, or in this case, this would be better we do this, but we can't do this because it's illegal, but in Vedic times they did it, and if we could do it now it would be better, but we're not going to do it because it's against the law. There's all these shades of gray. so there's so many things. Do we believe in polygamy? Do we believe in euthanasia? Do we believe, in this, that, and the next thing? And so, no, we don't. We don't believe in polygamy. We don't believe in euthanasia. Well, Brigham Marsh fasted to death. That's euthanasia. So I guess we do believe in it sometimes. Devotees do fast to death. And do we believe in polygamy? Well, polygamy was legal in India up to 50 years ago. It was part of Vedic culture. It's illegal in America. Do Westerners believe in polygamy? Well, you can get married and divorce, get married and divorce, get married and divorce, and end up supporting 2 wives and be married to 1. That's polygamy. So they do believe in it also. So it's like, no, we don't believe in polygamy. You see what I'm saying? So anytime there's a discussion, unless you go deep into the topic, you'll just make a black and white statement. So that's my point. So, I think the statement you got, what this devotee said, it's true in a certain sense, that it's illicit sex if you don't have children, and you don't get married unless you want children. But when you go into the shades of grey in the broader sense, the preaching movement of Mahaprabhu, etc., we are not going to say Prabhupada is not happy with Charu and his wife because they're doing phenomenal preaching. Just incredible, amazing. They have a Diwali festival with 30,000 people. Incredible, amazing. Touch their feet, bow down to their feet, take the dust, put it on your head, get their Shakti. Amazing preaching. Say, Charu, I don't like you, you didn't have kids, there's something wrong with you. No. He's got he's got thousands of kids now who he preaches to, right? So that's my point. Okay, so I will let you go, and we will see you on Saturday morning. Yeah, thank you for attending, and Hare Krishna to everybody. Have a good. You're in the evening, so have a good rest, and think about Krishna's Leelas with Radharani. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.